and suddenly there is no answer. Maybe you know these moments you're in contact with someone and suddenly they do not answer you anymore. The question always is, how can this happen? Some of you might even know the term, and the term is ghosting. And when you now think, I think this became a bit more common in the recent past. I don't think this was big of an issue back in the days. Probably you're right. The question is, how do we deal with it? And that's why we're here today. Hello and welcome to our newest episode. We are dealing with ghosting. Very important is when ghosting happens, you're not alone here. It happens to many people at the moment, and many of them wonder, why does this actually happen and how can I deal with it? And that's exactly what we are going to talk about today. When it comes to ghosting, it means you send out an email, you were in contact before. It does not mean, by the way, that someone gets a cold email. So let's say you confirm someone on LinkedIn and someone sends you in a pitch immediately. Look, buy this, send me this, I want to know this. You don't have a right to an answer when there was no consent to get contacted before. Of course, there's sales, and I agree. Sales happens, including cold outreach. That just happens. Very important here is when you are in contact and suddenly you don't hear back. That's where the not so great moments happen. Let's say you apply for a certain organization and you wonder, why is the job offline suddenly? Did they decide for someone else? Why is there no response? I mean, no happens sometimes. Why can't they talk to me? Or you are in a sales process and suddenly the other side doesn't get back to you. There is no reason. If there's no reason for that, you don't know if they decided for someone else, why they did so. That's extremely unprofessional when someone does that. The question is, how do you deal with that kind of ghosting? And the first thing, of course, is what are the contexts usually? And the very first context, of course, is sales. You are in a sales negotiation. Someone says, hey, I want to buy this or that service or this and that product. And then it goes a bit back and forth. You have a negotiation and suddenly they decide for someone. And this is always part of a sales process, you might sometimes lose. And very important is when someone loses, they have a right to get informed and not just get ghosted. And by the way, sales also means when in a leadership context, someone has that. So you are in a negotiation about either a salary raise or suddenly someone says, I have an idea and I want to have this idea placed in our project. And suddenly the leader just doesn't get back to them. Extremely unprofessional. It even happens in daily business. People say, we are in a negotiation with a certain department within our organization. And they say, yeah, we get back to you about your idea. Thank you very much. And you never hear back from them. You get a promise within the organization in which you work, and they just say, yeah, I'm not going to answer you. Yeah, sorry, not sorry. So, and that's, of course, not great when even in daily business that happens. The question is now, what are the consequences when this happens? Because ghosting always has consequences. Now, the number one consequence always is the handling of it. When you, of course, are in a sales process, you can always send a reminder. So, for example, you say, hey, we were in contact. What about this? Always send a reminder. But very important is as soon as you send a reminder on different channels, you call, they don't pick up the phone, or they pick up the phone and then hang up, or they don't answer your mail. While you were in consentful contact before, that is, of course, not well handled by the other side. When someone applies for a job with you, saying no happens. I was rather shocked. No, I was extremely shocked, to be fair, when I just recently read that someone says, "Oh yeah, we don't say no to candidates when they apply. We just ghost them because otherwise we just get sued anyway." When you get sued anyway, you obviously have a wildly unjust process in place for your recruiting. You need to be aware people have a right to get a no. When you are in contact with people, tell them why something has not happened. And sometimes, of course, the reasons are a bit vague when they say, hey, we had lots of applications, others were just better. That's not great, but at least you had a reason for that. And they didn't get into any details, sometimes because laws in your country might be that strict that they are very afraid of getting sued. However, very important is you at least got a response. And the response is absolutely fair game. When someone says, could we clarify XYZ, there is a right to clarification. By the way, if you don't do that, if you just ghost them, it's your legitimation that gets hurt. So when there is Mr. or Mrs. Miller and suddenly they don't get an answer from Mr. or Mrs. Miller, from person Miller, then they probably will simply say, yeah, that person's probably overwhelmed with their emails. That person isn't able to handle a usual work desk day. That person isn't able to manage their email. That person isn't able to manage their workload. It is your legitimation that gets hurt. So be aware that often when you ghost people, that your legitimation gets hurt, not the legitimation from the other side. And by the way, of course, people can escalate it. They can ask for, hey, let's talk. Hey, let's chat. Here's a voice message. Here's a call. Here's a WhatsApp message. Here's an email. In the hope that they get back from you, then that they hear back from you. However, when you keep on not getting back to them, they can, of course, conclude you're overwhelmed with anything and you're not up to the job, which is, by the way, a reasonable conclusion. So be aware that this quickly goes against you. And by the way, when this happens within the same organization which you work, it is perfectly reasonable at a certain point to say, hey, look, we really need to move forward in this project. We tried everything to reach out to you. No way worked. No approach worked. I never heard back from you. So we are now going to do A, B, C. And if I don't hear back from you, I consider this a silent agreement. And that is, of course, the very last option because it is rather a bit straightforward to do that. However, it is the only thing possible to get the project moving. You cannot simply wait for one person being able to suddenly handle their emails properly for once and you're waiting there for weeks. That is simply not possible. Also, candidates in an application process won't wait for you just because you are unable to handle your emails. The question now is, how do you implement this in your organization that things actually become productive? And of course, number one is you have to tell people that when you misbehave and you ghost, you harm your employer branding. And that, by the way, happened to me when I was a young person just out of uni. Someone gave me a cold call and I was on the phone and said, stop calling me. What kind of nonsense? And hung up the phone. And my boss immediately brought me to his office and said, look, you are the face of the organization outside there. And now maybe there was some student guy sitting in a call center who thought, I might have applied here, but there seemed to be a couple of very unreasonable people there, so I don't think I want to work there. So it's very important that employer branding needs to stay in the place of reasonable acting. Because anything which is aggressive, anything which is unprofessional, anything which is ghosting like will harm your employer branding. And you do not want to have that out there. Very important. By the way, it also shows what kind of organizational culture you have. When you ghost people, they simply say you have a non-committing culture. And that, of course, and also people will think you can't organize yourself. That is, ghosting people is never acceptable. Ghosting people is never professional. It's always back on you, your organization, and you as a person. So the organizational culture reflects on that not too well. And of course, sometimes you say, I just got so much to do. And that's exactly the point which I make. You need to be professionally trained on time management. And of course, the awareness that all of this happens outside, that you leave this impression, needs to be made. You need to be professionally trained on these matters. And I just last week gave a time management class. So time management and awareness about this needs to be placed. And only when you know all of this and then you handle it professionally, then you will not ghost and then you will not practice ghosting. And then you will also tell people sometimes, hey, sorry, we chose someone else due to budget. We chose someone else because it was better a fit to our demands. No, we chose someone else because of X, Y, Z. And then people can handle it and they might stay in touch with you in a positive way. And maybe next time it works to work together. And by the way, this can only be made as a decision after you listen to absolutely anyone in a proper way. You cannot simply say, oh, I got this one email and yeah, you applied for this job. Sorry, after one email, I think you're not a fit to XYZ. You cannot read out what it's especially when you say something very complex. When you say, oh yeah, I think qualification wise in this very complex engineering thing, someone else was better qualified and was a better fit for the team and all of that. So you derive something very complex from a two-line email. That is impossible and extremely unprofessional when you do anything like that. Always be aware that people have a right to be heard, especially when you were in consentful contact before. And then you can clarify things. And even then you can say, hey, look, we both talked and we both now say, sorry, not a fit. And then we move on. But you're still in good standing. When you say, I'm not getting back to you, it's your legitimation that gets hurt. It's your image that gets hurt. It's your employer branding that gets hurt. Ghosting is never acceptable. When you do it the positive way, just as I described, everything will turn out well with absolutely anyone, and your organization will also be in good standing with anyone. And I wish you all the best doing so. And when you now say, oh, I think that's quite complicated, I have a couple of questions, feel free to do so. Like this, when you, by the way, now watch this video on YouTube, like this video, feel free to subscribe to my channel, leave a comment there. Thank you very much for doing so. By the way, feel free when you listen to me on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to leave a review there, 5 stars. Thank you very much for doing so as well. And recommend this channel, podcast and videocast amongst your friends, colleagues, workplace, anywhere you like. Share it on social media. Thank you very much for doing so as well. One extra bonus we have are the leadership tips, the YouTube shorts, as the name says, only available on YouTube. So it pays off to not only subscribe, but also put the little bell in there so you get updates as soon as anything new happens. And of course, when you like to follow me on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, feel free to do so as well. You can also go on my website, nb-networks.biz, so you see what I do for a living here. When you now say, I have to discuss something with you, but it's not public, not in the comment section, feel free to send me an email. nb@nb-networks.biz. I'm looking forward to hearing from you there. And when you're looking for live sessions, yes, we have them. We just had one. The next live session is coming up quite soon. expert.nb-networks, expert.nb-networks.com. When you go there, you can just put your email address in there, and no worries, you receive only one email every Wednesday morning, and that's full. It's 100% content, ad-free guarantee. You get full access to all the podcasts in English and German language, full access to all the articles, no paywall, no nothing, no sales. And of course, there's the next date and time and the access link for the next live session. The most important, and by the way, of course, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, on the German platform Xing, I'm as well. Follow me on Instagram, like me on Facebook, and of course, follow this channel. Thank you very much for doing so as well. However, the most important thing is apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive aspects that you obviously want to see. And I wish you all the best doing so. Feel free to contact me. I answer every single measure within 24 hours or less. You can, of course, just ask very general questions, or you simply say, hey, we need you as a trainer, coach, consultant, mentor, project interim manager. I'm available for that as well. Thank you very much for doing so. Yeah, the very first, the very last thing is always the most important thing. After you applied everything that you heard, because only then you will see the positive change. There's only one thing at the end for me to say. At the end of the podcast and at the end of the videocast, there's always only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.